Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics and, well now, in a recent American poll, investigating the views specifically of voters in key swing congressional seats up for election in next year's midterms in America, something very interesting emerged. About half of them want President Trump to be impeached. It's a huge number, a record number in fact. Now, if you're thinking, big deal, Phil, those voters don't get to impeach Trump, it'll never happen. Absolutely. None of this points to Trump being impeached. And what's even the point of impeachment if the numbers aren't there to make it stick? But that misses the key point here. Those voters do not have the power to impeach Trump, but they do have the power to turn Congress against him. Of course, Trump is fighting back, but is he strong enough to do so? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. Now, you may be thinking, look, another poll, how reliable is it really? Well, this isn't some online opt-in gimmick. This is the September Lake Research poll. It's commissioned by the watchdog Free Speech for People. They didn't cut corners. It was live cell bilingual, weighted to accurately reflect the 2024 electorate in the very districts that decide congressional majorities. I am assured that this poll was done properly. Now, the headline, 49% want impeachment. Remember, this isn't just voters. It's not just voters expected to take part in next year's midterms either. The poll was specifically surveying voters who will be taking part in swing seats next year, weighted according to their likelihood to vote. In other words, the voters who will determine whether Congress remains in Trump's control or not. It didn't look at voters in seats where there's no serious chance of a flip or those not voting at all next year. But here's another thing. A full 45% of those voters say they strongly support impeachment. Disapproval for Trump's job performance sits higher at 56%. You break it down, the independents, the voters who really swing elections, split 48% for impeachment to 43% against. And remember, the 43% against are not necessarily people who think Trump's doing all right. They just don't think he's doing badly enough to warrant impeachment, right? You know, Democrats, obviously, as you might expect, almost unanimous, 82% in favour. Republicans largely oppose it. But a significant 10% of them are crossing over. In other words, the very centre of the electorate, the people who ultimately pick the winners and losers, has already rendered a fairly clear verdict. It's not just noise. That is a signal from the heart of American politics. Now, normally impeachment talk is always simmering, right? Bubbling underneath the surface because, you know, everything's so tribal. And it will often be dismissed as partisan rhetoric, because often it is. But here it's boiled over in just a few months. Like, why the fast escalation? Because for these swing voters, the scandals aren't theoretical or abstract. They are concrete actions. They're widely reported. And many see them as direct assaults on their institutions and constitutional norms. Voters have been watching in disbelief as uniformed troops occupied American cities, not at the request of the governor, but after Trump declared that governor in rebellion. They saw him deploy military forces without congressional authorization, threatening war against states and local governments that dare oppose his administration. This is not a political disagreement. This is an unprecedented display of executive power, raising serious questions about the role of the military in domestic affairs. Then there was the bizarre move to label Antifa, loose idea, it's not a structured group, as a terror organisation. Well, how do you do that? The group doesn't really exist. So legal experts are immediately flagging this as unconstitutional, of course, arguing it's going to enable politically motivated investigations and prosecutions of anyone deemed an opponent. They'll just be labelled Antifa. Well, therefore you're a terrorist. Voters also saw him fire federal prosecutors who balked at pursuing politically charged cases and has instead replaced them with loyalists who don't have the necessary experience. You know, these weren't subtle manoeuvres. They're bold public challenges to the independence of their system. And let's not forget the well-documented pattern of abuses, the foreign money favours that blur the lines between personal profit and public service, violating emolument clauses, the pardons for political allies, You know, the insurrectionists, they were all pardoned, and yet he's going after people who've done nothing wrong. You know, completely undermines the rule of law. Reports of his administration usurping Congress's powers, defying court orders, engaging in corrupt practices. There were even plans leaked for unilateral military action in Latin America. All paints a picture of executive overreach and raises concerns about potential war crimes even. Oh, and let's not forget the small matter of his refusal to release the Epstein files after promising to do so very quickly after being inaugurated. And you put all of this together, you know, these 25 distinct grounds for impeachment range from constitutional violations to abuses of emergency and prosecutorial powers, all meticulously catalogued by groups like Free Speech for People. You know, the word abuse shows up in a lot of their focus groups, and it's not just from his detractors. Even amongst voters, people who voted for him last November, there's a growing sense that he's crossed lines. These aren't just policy disagreements, they're viewed as fundamental threats to democracy and the rule of law, eroding his support in those crucial districts. And to really grasp the significance of this 49%, we need a little historical context. So, at this point in Obama's first term, impeachment support was like 4%. Under George W. Bush, even after the widespread criticism he got following his piss-poor response to Hurricane Katrina, it peaked at 11%. Now, here's a real comparison. Richard Nixon, deep in the quagmire of Watergate, only hit 38% support for impeachment in swing districts after the infamous Saturday Night Massacre. A moment of profound constitutional crisis. Trump is already 11 points past Nixon, and he's done it without a special counsel report detailing obstruction, no damning audio tapes, no article of impeachment being drafted for this latest term. You know, that massive gap tells you just how raw the public reaction is to his plans, how visceral the concern. It also tells you how much room this sentiment has to grow, especially as more details emerge and the political pressure mounts. It's not an anomaly. It's an unprecedented level of discontent with the president in his first year. Signals a deep and widespread concern about his authoritarian actions and constitutional violations. I mean, you can have voters who deeply disapprove of a political leader and can't wait for the day when they're voted out of office, or in Trump's case, just dumped out of office. If you want them to be specifically impeached, that's you saying that they're doing so badly, they're such a danger, that you want them removed right now, right this instant. I mean, let's talk about the cold, hard electoral maths here. Public opinion counts for nothing in a first-past-the-post system. It's the views of key swing voters, but this poll looks at those. Control of the House of Representatives runs through a relatively small number of districts. You're talking about 38 districts. They are the ultimate purple seats, the battlegrounds where every vote actually does count. If impeachment enthusiasm amongst independents stays anywhere near 50%, and remember it's like 49% at the moment, those incumbent Republicans are facing an impossible choice. They'd have to pick, wouldn't they? Do they break with Trump, which risks, of course, a fierce primary challenge from his loyal base, potentially losing their seat from the right, or do they stand by him only to face an angry electorate that increasingly sees Trump as a law-breaking threat to the Constitution, maybe all but guaranteeing a loss from the centre? Either way, the old base first strategy where you just energise your core and hope for the best stops working. Every single dollar spent on advertisements, every campaign speech, every town hall meeting turns into a referendum on whether you, as a Republican representative, really trust the president with the Constitution. Early internal polls are already showing that 5 of those 38 vulnerable seats are effectively like underwater if impeachment becomes a central campaign issue. And with filing deadlines only 14 months away, the clock is ticking for these incumbents to figure out their survival strategy. This isn't just about party loyalty anymore. It's about political self-preservation in the face of an electorate deeply concerned about executive overreach. Of course, Trump and his MAGA buddies are not just sitting on the shore commanding the sea to retreat. As I've discussed before, Trump's attempts to deploy the National Guard against the wishes of state governors is a deliberate strategy of laying the groundwork to being able to deploy the military for whatever purposes he likes, simply by declaring emergency. He's normalising the deployments. That's what he's doing. He's normalising those deployments for when he wants to do it in a year's time. The president, who has spent years talking about stolen elections, is going to start talking about them again next year in order to mask the fact that he is going to steal them. Mark my words, he intends to deploy the military in order to actually steal elections, disrupting the voting process in strong Democrat voting areas of key swing seats. I would not rule him out seizing voting machines and literally fiddling the results, all in the name of preventing voting fraud. Donald Trump does not want Congress against him. Right now, he's behaving like an absolute monarch, not because he has absolute power. The constitutional checks and balances are still in place. Congress and the Supreme Court can still force him to stay within his own legal boundaries. They're choosing to let him wander, by and large. The Supreme Court remains in his pocket, come what may. Congress is trickier. He doesn't want voters removing the toadies who are enabling his authoritarian behaviour. But here is the high-stakes game he's playing. In order to steal the election, he has to make some very blatant authoritarian moves. That increases resistance to him. If he succeeds, the resistance won't matter because it's the balance of political power which has any practical impact. But if Trump cannot do enough to steal the elections, if the resistance to him is too strong, he's actually increasing the chances of his power draining away from 2027. Now, of course, if this happens, expect the president to unleash hell before the new members of Congress can be confirmed. America will have to fight to save their democracy here no matter what happens. But this poll suggests that a large number of key voters do see the danger. And that means there's hope. And this polling will be a good one to track because if the number climbs higher over the course of the next year, that is momentum towards a major pushback against undemocratic behaviour. Let's see. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.